I stood there, the taste of dog food still lingering in my mouth, as my family laughed like it was all just a joke. After all the years of giving them everything, they served me that slop as dinner, just to mock me. But I wasn't the one laughing anymore. The eviction papers I slid across the table? That was my punchline. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The smell of burnt gravy and boxed mashed potatoes clung to the air like a bad memory. The duplex's kitchen, cramped, faded, and too quiet, hadn't seen a family dinner in months, maybe years. Helen Carter, shoulders stiff but back straight, placed 4 ceramic plates on the formica table. A roast, some overcooked green beans, and a slice of dry cornbread. Sharon had insisted on doing it all tonight. Michael slumped into his chair without a word. Lacey hovered by the fridge, earbuds hanging around her neck, not fully committed to being here. Sharon, however, moved with a peculiar smirk, like she was preparing for a punchline only she knew. "Dinner is served," Sharon chirped with mock grandeur, setting a 5th plate in front of Helen with exaggerated care. Helen looked down. The contents on her plate were grayish-brown, gelatinous, and slick around the edges. It smelled metallic. Wrong. She didn't react. She didn't ask. She just stared at it. Michael burst out laughing. "You should be grateful. It's cheaper than steak." Lacey froze, eyes darting between her mother and grandmother, confusion turning quickly to horror. "Relax," Sharon said, waving her manicured hand. "It's just a little joke. A light-hearted family moment." "Is it?" Helen asked, voice so calm it silenced the room. Michael chuckled again, but this time it didn't carry. "Come on, Ma, it's Alpo or something. Don't be so uptight." Helen picked up her fork slowly, like it weighed more than it should. She scooped a small bite of the slop, paused just a second, then placed it in her mouth and chewed. Sharon's eyes sparkled. Michael leaned back in his chair, triumphant. Lacey looked like she might throw up. Helen swallowed, set her fork down, and dabbed her lips with the edge of her napkin. "Tastes familiar?" she said flatly, "like something you'd serve a guest you hate." No one laughed this time. She rose from the table with controlled grace and walked to the sink. The faucet hissed as she rinsed her plate. Her hands trembled only slightly, but enough for Lacey to notice. Behind her, Sharon muttered, "Jesus, it's just a prank. Everyone's so sensitive these days." Helen didn't respond. She dried her hands, adjusted the gold watch on her wrist, one of the few things she still wore from her late husband, and left the room. 10 minutes later, the front door clicked open again. Janice Miller stepped in, holding a plastic container of peach cobbler and wearing her usual quilted coat despite the muggy summer evening. "Knocked twice," she said, voice light but eyes already scanning Helen's face. "Brought dessert. You looked tired at church yesterday." Helen sat stiffly on the couch, one hand resting on her knee. She didn't look tired. She looked like stone. Janice set the cobbler down and sat beside her. "Something happen?" A beat passed. Then Helen looked at her, eyes sharp but hollow. "They served me dog food tonight." Janice blinked. "You mean, like a bad casserole or—" "No," Helen said, her voice smooth as polished steel. "Actual dog food, on a plate. As a joke." Janice's mouth opened and closed once. "Why didn't you call me?" Helen stared ahead at nothing. "Because I wanted to see how far they'd go." Silence blanketed the room. Outside, a lawnmower hummed faintly a few houses down. Helen's kitchen still smelled faintly of canned meat and spite. Janice reached for her hand, but Helen pulled away gently, deliberately. "They think I'm their dog," she said softly. "Tomorrow, they'll see who owns the leash." She stood up slowly, her joints creaking in quiet protest. Her spine, however, remained perfectly straight. From upstairs, Michael's voice echoed faintly, laughing again. Sharon's sharper voice followed. Lacey's door slammed. Helen walked into her bedroom, closed the door, and locked it behind her. The click sounded like the first domino falling. The morning sunlight cut sharp across Helen's kitchen counter, catching the edge of a stack of manila folders she hadn't opened in months. She didn't sip her coffee. She held it, black, cooling, while her eyes scanned the ledger before her with a clarity that hadn't touched her in years. She'd been up since dawn. The peach cobbler from Janice still sat on the stovetop, untouched. She hadn't eaten since the joke dinner, but she didn't feel hunger. Just a kind of simmering steadiness that occupied her limbs like purpose had moved back in. From the hall closet, she pulled out a dusty fireproof lockbox and set it on the table. The combination clicked open like muscle memory. Inside, her life was organized in clean folders labeled in her late husband's handwriting: mortgage, paid, will, insurance, receipts. Helen pulled out the one that mattered now. Property deed, 3125 Harmon Avenue owner, Helen Louise Carter. Sole proprietor, paid in full, 1999. She ran her finger over the embossed seal, then held it up to the light. The duplex was hers, entirely. No cosigners, no liens, just her name on the paper. And the ink hadn't faded. Her lips thinned. Downstairs, a familiar creak. Michael heading to the fridge in his boxers like he always did, unbothered, unbent. She heard the snap of a soda can opening. My house, my food, my electricity, she thought. She reached for another folder. Rent records, spiral notebook, entries handwritten with neat dates, check marks and receipts clipped to each month. The last payment from Michael? October 2021. That was 32 months ago. Helen sat straighter. She picked up the landline and dialed a number without needing to look it up. Janice answered on the second ring. Well, you're up early. Did you finally try the cobbler? No, Helen said evenly. I've been looking over some paperwork. Janice paused. Let me guess. Duplex deed paperwork? Helen didn't smile, but there was a flicker in her eyes. They haven't paid rent in almost 3 years, Janice. Not a single dime. All while Sharon walks around like she owns the place. Janice exhaled through the phone. You've been their free ride, honey. Their wallet with legs. Not anymore. Another pause. Then Janice said, You want me to get my notary stamp ready? Do that. Helen hung up. By noon, she sat on her porch, paperwork stacked beside her in a clean folder marked Legal Prep. The air was thick with late August humidity. A squirrel skittered across the front yard as Sharon's voice drifted through an open window. Loud, shrill, complaining about Lacey's attitude lately. Helen didn't flinch. She reached for her cell and tapped the contact. Robert Hale, landlord-tenant law. A calm male voice picked up. Hale Law Office. This is Robert. Robert, it's Helen Carter. I need to begin eviction proceedings. There was a slight pause. I remember you. Duplex on Harmon, right? That's the one. Still got your deed? Front and center. Any rental agreement on file? Verbal. Nothing formal. But I've got over 10 years of written receipts, and 3 years of them missing. Robert's voice sharpened just a bit. So, they've been living rent-free on your property? Yes. Then it's yours. You decide how it ends. Helen leaned back in her chair. The cicadas had started buzzing. Across the street, the neighbor's sprinkler rotated with lazy indifference. I've decided, she said. Then we start today, Robert replied. I'll have the 30-day notice ready by tomorrow. We do this by the book. I want every step documented. No surprises, no loopholes. You'll get that, he said. And Helen? Don't wait too long. People like that. They don't leave quietly. Helen's eyes flicked toward the upstairs window where she could see Michael's shadow moving, shirtless, dragging a fan across the room. I'm counting on it. She ended the call and stood, the folder clutched in her hand like a weapon. From inside, Lacey peered out the living room window and locked eyes with her. Helen didn't smile, but she nodded once, just enough for Lacey to understand. The leash had slipped off. The hand holding it now? Firm and unshaking. The envelope looked plain, almost harmless, white, neatly sealed with 3 words, printed in crisp black ink. Notice to vacate. Helen placed it on the kitchen table like a dealer laying down the final card. She'd made 2 copies, one for the upstairs unit, one for her records. The third, just in case, sat notarized and stapled to Janice's signed affidavit, tucked in a folder labeled Evidence, Carter Tenancy. It was Tuesday morning, 8:01 a.m., and Helen knew precisely where they'd be. Michael never left for his part-time warehouse shift until noon, and Sharon never did anything before coffee and Facebook. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step a reminder of years she'd let slide, of birthday cakes baked, holidays tolerated, slights endured in silence. She used to bring Sharon casseroles. Now she brought justice. She knocked once, then twice, harder. Inside, footsteps, muffled voices. Sharon opened the door, silk robe barely tied, mascara smudged from sleep. She blinked. What? Helen handed her the envelope. Sharon didn't even open it. She laughed. A short, hard bark. What is this, coupons? It's your 30-day notice to vacate the premises, Helen said, voice steady as the concrete stooped beneath them. Sharon tore it open, scanned the first line, and let out another scoff. You've got to be kidding me. Behind her, Michael appeared, half-dressed, rubbing sleep from his eyes. What's going on? She's kicking us out, Sharon said, holding the letter up like evidence in a courtroom drama. Helen thinks she's a damn sheriff now. Michael took the letter and squinted at it. You're evicting us? Helen nodded once. 30 days. It's all by the book. Michael's laugh was colder than Sharon's. You wouldn't dare. Courts don't just side with cranky old ladies who want their space back. Helen's gaze didn't flinch. Courts read deeds, not insults. The air held. Michael shoved the notice back into Sharon's hand like it burned him. Unbelievable. Maybe if you paid rent, Helen said coolly, you'd have earned a conversation. But this isn't a conversation. It's a formal notice. Sharon crumpled the paper and tossed it onto the hallway floor. You're delusional. What are you gonna do? Drag us out in your bathrobe? Helen leaned in just enough for Sharon to step back. I'll be whatever I need to be. But make no mistake, you will leave this house. On your feet? Or on the sheriff's timeline? From the living room, Lacey appeared. She'd been watching quietly, leaning against the stair rail in a hoodie and jeans, eyes wide. Helen turned to go, pausing only when Lacey gave her the smallest nod. Then, the girl mouthed it. I'm on your side. Helen didn't respond. Not yet. But something settled behind her eyes, steel locking into place. Back downstairs, Janice sat at the table with a legal pad and her notary stamp kit laid out like a surgeon prepping for an operation. Helen handed her the bound folder. You brought everything? Rent ledgers, sign-in sheets, voided checks. Every scrap. Janice flipped through the pages with professional efficiency. You kept better records than most landlords I've known, and you weren't even charging them market rate. Helen crossed her arms. Didn't need to bleed them, just wanted them to grow up. Janice stamped the final page and signed it. Well, they're about to grow somewhere else. Outside, Sharon's voice rose in a screech through the upstairs window, hurling curses to no one in particular. Michael's voice followed, louder, sloppier, the sound of something breaking. A lamp, maybe. They're gonna make this messy, Janice murmured, not looking up. I'm counting on it, Helen said. She slid the notarized ledger into the folder and clicked it shut. Then she walked to the kitchen window, pulled the curtain aside, and watched Sharon pacing on the porch like a caged animal. The crumpled notice lay on the step beside her. Lacey slipped out the door behind her parents and crossed the yard silently, backpack slung over one shoulder. She looked up at Helen through the window. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes said enough. She wasn't going back upstairs. Not tonight. By Thursday, the neighbors were staring. Helen felt it in the sideways glances from Mrs. Everett next door, in the polite but rushed hello from the Johnson kid as he mowed the front lawn across the street, in the way Denise from church suddenly canceled their coffee date. Until things calmed down, something had shifted in the air, just enough to make it foul. The first time she saw the post, it was Lacey who showed her. They sat together in the kitchen, Lacey on her phone, Helen with her coffee going cold again. The girl looked pale, fingers trembling as she scrolled. She's putting it on the neighborhood group chat, Lacey said. Like, all of it. Read it, Helen said. Lacey hesitated, then swallowed. It says, my mother-in-law's losing it. She's confused, paranoid, and trying to kick her own family out. I hate airing dirty laundry, but I'm worried for her safety, and ours. Anyone know how to report elder abuse when it's self-inflicted? Helen didn't blink. Anything else? There's more. She posted a photo of you from last Thanksgiving. Remember? You were sick with that flu? You looked tired. She captioned it. This is who's trying to play landlord right now. I'm scared, honestly. Helen took a slow breath. And the comments? Lacey scrolled. Half of them are buying it. Mrs. Everett said, bless her heart. Maybe it's time for assisted living. Helen exhaled. Let them talk. But it's not true, Lacey whispered. They don't know you. They will. She stood, walked to the file cabinet and pulled out another folder. This one was labeled, medical, annual exams, every checkup from the past decade. Clean blood work, Cognitive tests. Vision still good enough to pass the DMV renewal. She flipped to her most recent doctor's report, dated 5 months ago. No signs of memory loss, disorientation, or behavioral changes. Physically stable, mentally sharp. Signed by Dr. Patel, MD. Helen handed it to Lacey. Take a photo of that. Send it to yourself. Then send it to Robert Hale. You're going to sue them for slander? Helen's eyes darkened, but her voice stayed soft. I'm going to bury their lies with paperwork. The only language Sharon understands is control. I speak fluently. That night, the air turned heavy with summer storm clouds. The breeze howled low through the screen door, and Helen sat in her armchair with her legs wrapped in a quilt, holding her journal. She had taken to writing down everything: dates, names, exact words. This wasn't paranoia, it was evidence. The porch light buzzed. Down the hall, the old grandfather clock ticked just past 11:55 p.m. Then, bam, bam, bam. The front door shook with 3 brutal pounds. Helen didn't move. She waited. Then another round came. Bam, bam, bam. Open the damn door! Michael's voice, slurred and angry, crashed through the silence. You think you can just throw us out like trash? You think you can embarrass us like this? Helen stayed seated. Her phone was already recording. The little red light blinked, steady and unforgiving. You're crazy, he shouted again. Everyone thinks it. Just wait, old lady. You want to play landlord? You better start praying I don't become the wrecking crew. From behind the porch hedge, a small light blinked. Janice, iPad in hand, crouched in her bathrobe like a seasoned war journalist. The pounding stopped. Helen could hear Michael pacing, breathing hard. Then the sound of glass shattering. A flower pot from the railing, thrown against the pavement. He left. Janice crept up the steps minutes later and let herself in with the key Helen had given her earlier that week. Got all of it, she said. Both angles. Audio's clean. Helen simply nodded. The next morning, she emailed the recordings and the medical documents to Robert Hale under the subject line, Character Smear and Threat Evident, August 22nd. His reply came in 12 minutes later. Perfect. This is everything we need. They want to build a case that you're incompetent? They just gave us the hammer to crush theirs. Helen closed the laptop slowly. The image of Sharon's smirking post still burned in her mind. You started a fire, Sharon, she murmured to herself. But you forgot I don't burn. The courthouse smelled like old carpet and fresh nerves. Room 2B was packed tighter than usual for a weekday morning. A couple landlords whispered in the back row. A college student in wrinkled khakis sat nervously flipping through paperwork. But all eyes kept drifting toward the woman in the navy cardigan, seated stiff and still at the plaintiff's table. Helen Carter, arms folded over a leather folder, her hair neatly pinned back. To her right, Robert Hale clicked open a silver pen, eyes sharp behind rimless glasses. He didn't speak much, but everything about him said prepared. Across the aisle sat Michael, in a cheap, ill-fitting suit that still smelled faintly of last night's whiskey. Next to him, Sharon was dressed to perform. Black dress, conservative neckline, heavy on the fake humility. Her expression said, victim. Her eyes screamed liar. Judge Peterson, a broad-shouldered woman with decades of wear etched into her face, called the room to order. Carter Vitas Carter, eviction proceedings. Who's speaking for the plaintiff? Robert stood. Robert Hale, for Ms. Helen Carter, plaintiff and sole owner of the property. Defense? Michael cleared his throat and rose awkwardly. Michael Carter. Representing myself and my wife. The judge nodded. Begin. Robert stepped forward without papers, without preamble. Your Honor, my client has sole deed ownership of the duplex at 3125 Harmon Avenue. I've submitted property records, notarized rent ledgers, and digital correspondence confirming non-payment. 32 consecutive months of unpaid rent. He paused to hand the clerk a folder. My client issued a formal 30-day notice to vacate. No payment, no compliance. Therefore, we ask the court to grant eviction in full. Michael shot up. She promised us lifetime housing, he blurted. After Dad died, she said we'd always have a roof. Robert didn't even turn his head. Verbal sentiment is not a binding lease. Judge Peterson raised an eyebrow. Mr. Carter, do you have written proof of this promise? Michael sputtered. No, but it was understood. By whom? By me. By all of us. Judge Peterson leaned back. That's not how this works. Helen's voice broke the silence. They've mocked me in my own home, she said, eyes steady on the bench. They laughed while serving me dog food, told neighbors I was senile, tried to intimidate me into silence. I kept records. I followed the law. I'm asking the court to do the same. Sharon stood suddenly. That's a lie. She's delusional. Peterson didn't even flinch. Ma'am, sit down or I'll have you removed. Sharon slammed back into her seat, her mouth pressed into a bitter line. Robert calmly passed another file to the clerk. Here's a notarized log of abusive incidents, along with evidence of recent harassment and online defamation, complete with timestamps and screenshots. The judge skimmed the top page, lips tight. Michael leaned toward Sharon and whispered furiously. She hissed something back. Their unity, what little was left, was fracturing in plain sight. Peterson set the folder down. Eviction is granted, 30 days to vacate. Appeal window is 10 business days. But let me be clear. Any attempt at retaliation, slander, or physical intimidation moving forward will be met with criminal consequences. Michael's mouth twisted. We'll appeal. You'll regret this. Helen didn't look at him. She stared at the bench until the gavel dropped. Outside the courthouse, the sun was too bright. Robert held the door as Helen stepped out onto the steps, folder tucked beneath her arm like armor. They'll fight dirty now, he said. Helen glanced back toward the glass entrance. Through it, she could see Sharon on her phone, pacing wildly, while Michael leaned against the wall, head in hands. They already are, Helen murmured, but now it's on record. A car honked from the street below. Janice pulled up to the curb, waving from behind the wheel. Lacey was in the passenger seat, earbuds in, her eyes locked on the doors of the courthouse. Helen took one long breath and walked toward the car. Behind her, Sharon burst out the doors, yelling something unintelligible into the wind. Helen didn't turn around, but Lacey opened the car door slowly and watched her mother with something colder than defiance in her face, something final. The manila envelope sat unopened on Helen's kitchen table. Robert Hale's name was scribbled neatly in the return corner. It had arrived earlier that afternoon via courier, and Helen had let it sit for hours, just staring at it like it might bite. When she finally sliced it open, she didn't expect her hands to shake. Inside were 2 pages, photocopies. One was a quitclaim deed, dated 2 months ago, transferring ownership of the duplex to Michael Carter and Sharon Carter. The signature at the bottom? Helen Louise Carter. Helen stared at it for a full minute. The penmanship was close, too close. The long L in Louise, the slightly slanted H, but it wasn't hers. It was almost hers. She picked up the phone and called Robert. I need to see you, she said. Tonight. By 6:45 p.m., Robert was seated across from her in the living room, the original documents spread across her coffee table like evidence in a murder trial. He pointed at the signature. This is a problem. Helen's jaw was clenched tight. They forged my name. They submitted it to the county recorder's office, but it triggered a verification flag. Thankfully, the clerk didn't file it. They sent it to me for confirmation. Helen ran a hand over her face, then down the arms of her chair. Her voice dropped to a whisper. She tried to steal the house. On paper, Robert didn't soften it. Yes, and now it's not just a civil matter. It's criminal. She looked up at him, the words weighing heavy in her chest. So we press charges? We start by filing a fraud report with the county. I'll walk you through it. Once that's done, I'll take it to the prosecutor's office. He leaned forward. But Helen, you'll need to be ready for how ugly this gets. Helen stood and walked to the window. Outside, the porch light cast soft amber shadows against the lawn. A stray cat trotted across the sidewalk. Her world looked normal. It wasn't. Behind her, Janice entered carrying a tray of tea. She saw Helen's face, then looked down at the spread of papers. Janice didn't ask. So they went there, she muttered. Helen turned slowly. They tried to erase me. With ink, Janice put the tray down and pulled a chair beside her. Then pushed through. You've come too far to let them rewrite your life. Helen didn't respond right away. She reached across the table and picked up the forged document again. Her name, stolen and weaponized. This, she said, is war. The next morning, Helen walked into the county fraud division with Robert beside her. She wore her navy cardigan again, the same one she'd worn to the eviction hearing. It had become her armor. The clerk, a young woman with sharp eyeliner and pink nails, took one look at the folder Robert slid across the counter and called her supervisor. They didn't need convincing. By noon, the formal fraud complaint was filed. Helen's affidavit was notarized. Her statement was recorded. The case was officially open. That night, Helen stepped onto the porch for fresh air. The sky was thick with stars and the buzzing sound of late summer cicadas. She was halfway through her second cup of tea when Sharon stormed across the yard like a storm in high heels. "You think this changes anything?" Sharon shouted, waving a letter in her hand. "You can't prove anything." Helen didn't move from her chair. "That's not my signature, and you know it," she said calmly. Sharon scoffed. "You're just bitter and old. You're scared we're smarter than you." "I'm not scared of smart," Helen said. "Just snakes who don't know how to shed their skins." Sharon crumpled the letter in her fist, then threw it into the grass. "You won't win." Helen looked out toward the sidewalk, where Janice stood behind the porch hedge again, phone lifted, recording in silent. "I already am," Helen said. Sharon turned on her heel and marched back across the yard, muttering curses under her breath. Helen stayed seated, eyes fixed on the horizon like she was waiting for dawn. And maybe she was. The envelope this time came certified, delivered with a sharp knock and a required signature. Helen stood at the threshold in her house slippers, pen in hand, eyes already narrowed. "Petition for emergency guardianship, Lucas County Probate Court." Helen opened it at the kitchen table, her jaw tightening as she scanned the pages. The words were dressed in legal padding, but their intent screamed loud and clear: incompetent, confused, unfit to manage her affairs. Michael was listed as the petitioner. A small sticky note was attached to the final page. Robert had scrawled in block letters, "Don't panic. I've already filed the objection. Call me when you're ready." Helen folded the petition calmly and slid it into her legal folder. She'd felt rage before. Quiet, enduring rage. But this was surgical, calculated. They weren't just trying to steal her house anymore. They were trying to erase her authority, her name, her mind. By noon, she was at Robert's office, seated across from his desk with Janice beside her, hands folded, back straight. "They're playing the incompetence card because nothing else is working," Robert said, tapping the petition with his index finger. "We'll submit your medical records from the last 2 years. No diagnosis, no decline. You passed your DMV renewal 6 months ago. You're sharper than I am." Helen offered a dry smile, but not as mean, apparently. He slid a single sheet across the desk. "The judge has scheduled a competency evaluation. County social worker. 1 hour. You'll get the report within 48 hours. I assume they'll be watching me like vultures outside the window?" Robert leaned forward. "Let them watch. Just don't give them a reason to circle." The evaluation happened 2 days later inside Helen's living room. The social worker, Ms. Connors, was kind-eyed but methodical. She asked about finances, routines, medications, the name of the current president, and how to spell world backwards. Helen passed each test with the same composure she once used on the factory floor when calming down grown men with machines twice their size. At the end, Ms. Connors closed her notebook and smiled. "Clear-headed, articulate, oriented. You're more organized than I am," she said. Helen offered her a peach soda on the way out. "I don't drink," the woman said, "but I'll be recommending dismissal." The hearing was set for Friday. Back in the same courtroom, Judge Peterson presided again, looking somehow even more annoyed to see the Carters back before her. Michael stood at the front, shuffling through poorly stapled papers. Sharon sat beside him, in an even tighter dress than last time, feigning concern with her hand pressed gently to her chest. "My mother's memory has been slipping," Michael began. "She forgets conversations, repeats herself. Sometimes she seems confused about the day. I love her, but I'm afraid she's not making rational decisions." Sharon sniffed loudly, like it was all too painful. Robert rose without theatrics. "My client has undergone a county-administered cognitive evaluation. She passed with full marks. We've submitted the results as Exhibit A. Her doctor confirms her mental faculties are stable and intact." He paused, then added, "The only confusion seems to be among the petitioners." Judge Peterson looked up. "Do you have anyone to corroborate that, Mr. Hale?" Robert turned slightly. "Yes. One witness, Lacey Carter." A murmur ran through the courtroom as Lacey rose from the second row, hair tied back, wearing a button-down blouse like armor. She walked to the witness stand, didn't glance once at her parents. Robert kept his tone even. "Lacey, you live in the same house as Miss Carter?" "I did," Lacey replied. "Until 2 weeks ago. Now I stay downstairs with my grandma." "And why's that?" "Because my parents served her dog food and laughed. They call her senile but hide what they've done. My grandma's the most clear-minded person in that house. Michael's face turned red. Sharon's knuckles were white. Judge Peterson didn't blink. Petition for guardianship is denied. Waste of the court's time. Her gavel fell before anyone could object. Outside, on the courthouse steps, Michael ripped the paperwork in half and stormed toward the parking lot. Sharon lingered behind, venom in her eyes. She looked at Helen like a crow staring down a hawk. "You think this is over?" she hissed. "We'll ruin you another way." Helen tucked the court order into her purse. "Try, but you'll need a sharper knife." Sharon didn't reply, just turned and followed her husband into the chaos they'd created. Helen stood in the sun, unshaken, but the war had only deepened. The knock on the door didn't rattle Helen this time. It was quiet, polite, a courtesy knock. She opened it to find Officer Delgado on the porch, mid-30s, calm-eyed, his badge catching a sliver of sunrise. "Ms. Carter," he said. "Got your call. You want to file a police report?" Helen nodded once. "For intimidation, repeated harassment, and I want it on record." He pulled a small notebook from his chest pocket. "Your son and daughter-in-law again?" She didn't flinch. Same voices, different masks. She led him inside, handed him copies of the forged deed, the court's guardianship dismissal, and a flash drive with Janice's porch recordings. Her system was airtight. Names, dates, timestamps. She wasn't giving them an inch of legal wiggle room. Officer Delgado reviewed the material slowly. "You've been thorough. I've had to be. You want to add a restraining order to this?" Helen looked past him, toward the staircase. She thought about the flower pot Michael had shattered, the way Sharon's voice could pierce through a wall like a blade, the way silence followed them like a rotten smell. "Yes," she said. "Temporary, for now. But file it today." Delgado nodded. "Consider it done." By dusk, the hardware store had delivered a full security kit. Motion lights, deadbolt upgrades, 4 cameras with night vision, and a front doorbell cam that uploaded straight to the cloud. Janice stood on a step stool in her bathrobe, helping mount the side camera with the kind of intensity usually reserved for holiday decoration. "I swear, Helen," she muttered, "if they so much as breathe near this door, this thing will catch it in 4K. Helen passed her the screwdriver. "Make sure it points toward the driveway. That's where she likes to stalk." Janice smirked. "She's about to get a full episode of Law & Order, Toledo Unit." Later, Helen made up the guest bed for Janice in the back room, double-locked all the windows, and placed a small baseball bat under her own bed, just in case. But she didn't feel scared. She felt aware. Aware of her surroundings, aware of herself, aware that sometimes fear could be a tool, like a knife you keep sharp, not to use, but to remind you of what you're willing to protect. That night, after Janice had dozed off with a heating pad and a bottle of Advil PM, Helen sat at the kitchen table with her journal. She opened to a fresh page. August 28th, 11:14 p.m. They laughed. "I'll file." They lied. "I'll record." They tried to erase me. "I'm carving my name into every page of this fight." She closed the journal and slid it into the drawer, next to the pepper spray and the extra batteries. Robert called the next morning. "Good news," he said. "The prosecutor's office has moved your fraud case up the chain." I dropped off the documents in person and spoke directly with the assistant DA. "She's pushing it forward. We'll likely see charges filed within the week." Helen paused, one hand on the sink. "You did that overnight?" I told her about the forged quitclaim, the recordings, and the failed guardianship stunt. I may have added a quote or two from Sharon's "You won't win" tirade. Helen let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "I'm not the frail one here, Robert," she said. "They are. They just don't know it yet." "Good," he said. "Keep your head clear. We're almost there." She hung up, turned back to the window. Outside, the street was quiet. Lacey's car was parked under the elm tree, her schoolbooks visible through the windshield. A far cry from the chaos upstairs. Then, movement, across the lawn. A figure ducked behind the trash bins. Helen didn't panic. She just walked calmly to the control panel and rewound the driveway cam. There he was, Michael, hoodie pulled tight, eyes wild, holding what looked like a crowbar, circling toward the side of the house. Helen hit record clip and saved it to a folder titled Threat Escalation, August 28th. She texted the video to Robert. The reply came 30 seconds later. "Get ready. After this, it's not just eviction anymore." The notice came with a knock no one could ignore. It was Friday morning, barely 9 a.m., when the white county SUV rolled up along the curb of 3125 Harmon Avenue. A sheriff's deputy in crisp uniform stepped out with calm, deliberate steps and a folded paper in hand. Helen met him on the porch, already dressed, coffee in one hand, folder in the other. "You Helen Carter?" he asked. "I am." He handed her the paper. Writ of possession, executed by the court, signed and sealed. The final nail. "Court has authorized removal if the occupants don't vacate within 72 hours, he said. "We'll be back Monday morning to confirm compliance or proceed with lockout." Helen took the document, scanned it, and nodded. "I'll be ready." The deputy tipped his cap. "We post both doors. You'll want to watch yourself this weekend. This tends to stir things up." She offered him a small smile. "It's been stirred. Now it's just boiling." He posted the notice, one copy on the door of the upstairs unit, the other on the shared mailbox post. By the time he got back into the cruiser, Sharon was already screaming through the second-story window. "This is illegal! This is abuse!" she shrieked, hair wild, holding her phone up like a weapon. "Someone call Channel 4! She's ruining her own family!" Helen didn't look up. She turned and walked back inside. Within the hour, Sharon's rant hit Facebook. Her post was a frantic smear of caps lock and martyrdom. "My elderly mother-in-law is kicking us out after everything we've done for her. We've cared for her, protected her, and this is how she thanks us. We are devastated. If anyone has room or resources, we might be homeless by Monday. Broken family, hush, elder abuse. Help us please." The reactions came fast, some sympathetic, most skeptical. A few knew the truth. Screenshots circulated. So did Janice's footage, and so did the sheriff's stamp. Meanwhile, Michael tried a Hail Mary. He filed a motion to stay the eviction, claiming procedural confusion and unfair burden to vacate within the timeline. Robert called Helen an hour later with the news. He filed a stall tactic, Robert said. "We responded immediately. The judge reviewed it this afternoon." "And?" Helen asked. Robert chuckled dryly. "Judge Peterson denied it in 2 sentences. Appeal without merit. Enforcement to proceed as ordered." Helen didn't smile. Not really. But her breath came easier. She passed the news along to Janice, who was halfway through wiping down the security camera lenses with Windex. "We're holding the line," Helen said. Janice snorted. "Damn right we are." Upstairs, Lacey moved quietly. She didn't announce it. She didn't ask permission. She simply packed her things in soft silence. A duffel bag, 2 suitcases, her sketchpad folder wrapped in a towel. Her posters came down. Her journals slipped into her backpack. A single photo, her and Helen at last year's fair, grinning over matching lemonades, was the only thing she left visible on the bed. She zipped up the last bag and stood still for a moment, eyes fixed on her reflection in the mirror. Down the hall, Sharon's voice blared again. "We're not leaving, Michael. She'll have to drag us out in front of the damn neighborhood. I don't care if it's the sheriff or the Pope." Lacey flinched. Then she grabbed her bags, walked down the stairs, and didn't look back. Helen opened the door before Lacey even knocked. No words passed between them, just a nod, a shared knowing. Helen pointed to the guest room with freshly washed sheets. Lacey walked inside and closed the door gently behind her. That night, Helen placed the folded writ of possession beside her journal. She lit a single candle at the kitchen table. Something about the soft flicker settled her breathing. Janice made hot cocoa for everyone. Lacey sat curled on the couch, headphones on, eyes half closed. Peace, not complete, but honest, settled over the downstairs unit. Until 2:17 a.m., a hard thud rattled the back door. Janice bolted upright in her cot. Helen was already up, grabbing the bat from under her bed. She checked the back cam. Michael. Again. Sweating. Pacing. Muttering to himself. Helen pressed a button on the alarm panel. A loud chirp signaled an armed perimeter. Michael froze. Helen opened the window just enough to be heard. 72 hours, she said, and not 1 minute more. The knock at the upstairs door didn't come with a warning. It came with badges. 2 officers, one uniformed, the other plainclothes, stood at the threshold of Sharon and Michael's unit just before noon on Saturday. The younger deputy held a copy of the forged deed. The plainclothes detective held a notepad. Both wore the same expression, professional curiosity mixed with a growing sense of certainty. Sharon opened the door mid-yell. "What now?" and froze. "Sharon Carter?" the detective asked. She blinked. "Yes? We're here to ask a few questions regarding a fraud report tied to a forged mortgage transfer," he said. "You can either answer them here, or we can continue this at the station." Michael appeared behind her in his boxers, eyes puffy and bloodshot. "This again? We already dealt with this in court." "No," the officer said, stepping forward. "You dealt with eviction. This is criminal fraud." He held up the document. "Did you submit this?" Sharon's face faltered. "That's a clerical thing. A misunderstanding. Michael handled most of it." "I didn't forge anything," Michael cut in, suddenly alert. "I just filled in what she told me to. We thought Helen signed it. Maybe the notary messed something up." The detective raised an eyebrow. "So you're blaming a notary for filing a false quitclaim deed transferring full property ownership to yourselves, without Helen Carter's signature verified?" Michael stepped back. We were trying to help her simplify her estate. It was her idea. She's getting older, and we wanted to protect the house. She never agreed to any of this," the detective said, firm now. "And your signatures don't match hers. Not even close." Sharon folded her arms, suddenly colder. "I want a lawyer." "Good idea," the detective replied. "We'll be in touch. Charges are pending, and just so you're aware, Judge Peterson has requested to personally review the fraud file this week." That Monday morning, Judge Peterson sat in her private chambers, glasses perched low on her nose, reviewing 3 side-by-side signatures under a document camera. Helen's original deed from 1999, the forged quitclaim from 2 months ago, and a third, an in-court signature collected during the guardianship hearing. Beside her sat a forensic handwriting analyst from the county's forensics lab. "This loop," the analyst said, pointing. "This curve on the C in Carter? Helen's always leans inward. The forged version leans out. That's not muscle memory. That's someone guessing." "Forgery?" Peterson asked. "No doubt," the expert said. Peterson closed the file and looked at her clerk. "Schedule a fraud trial, full criminal hearing. Notify the DA's office. This goes beyond civil now." That afternoon, Robert called Helen. He didn't even try to soften it. "They're cooked," he said. Helen was sitting in her kitchen, folding laundry, calm as ever. "Trial date?" "Next Friday." Peterson said it herself. "And you'll be called to testify." Helen folded one of Lacey's hoodies, smoothing the sleeves. "Of course. Also, Sharon's losing it. She blamed Michael in front of the detective. Word is she's looking for her own attorney now." Helen's tone never lifted. "Snakes don't share dens forever." She hung up the phone and turned to the window. Upstairs, yelling. Sharp, vicious, familiar. Sharon's voice, frantic, shrill. "You idiot! You said it was fine. You said we were safe." Then a crash. A door slamming. Footsteps. Lacey walked in from the hallway, phone in hand. "I recorded that," she said quietly. Helen met her eyes. "Good girl. Save it." That evening, Helen sat with Janice and Lacey in the living room. The TV was off. No music played. It was the kind of silence that held weight. "They tried to take everything," Janice said softly. "Your name, your home, your sanity." Helen poured tea with steady hands. "I keep my proof," she said. "Always." Outside, sirens flared faintly 2 blocks over. Distant, but near. Enough to be felt. Helen turned to the files on the table. Court dates, arrest documents, the sheriff's return order. Everything in its place. Then she picked up her pen and underlined the last entry in her journal. Trial set. Friday, September 6th. Truth is on deck. They're not ready for it. The deputies arrived just after 8 a.m. 2 cruisers pulled up along the curb, engines humming low. One marked, one unmarked. Both uniformed deputies stepped out slowly, businesslike, holding clipboards, walkie-talkies, and authority that didn't need volume. Helen was already on the porch, standing firm in slacks and a pressed blouse, hair pulled back tight. No nerves, just a folder under one arm, a thermos of coffee in the other. "Morning, Ms. Carter," Deputy Langston said, tipping his hat. "You ready?" "I've been ready," she said. Janice stood just inside the door, camcorder in hand, fully charged. Lacey sat on the edge of the couch, backpack at her feet, head down, earbuds in. But one bud wasn't connected, just enough to listen. The deputies knocked upstairs, hard. Then again. "Michael Carter? Sharon Carter? Sheriff's office. You've had 72 hours." Silence. Then, a voice behind the door. "Michael." Loud, panicked. playing for time. We're getting dressed. Langston stepped back. You've had 3 days to get dressed. He turned and gave a quiet nod to the locksmith. The man moved quickly. Wrench, drill. Done in under a minute. The lock popped with a clean click. Then the door swung open. Michael was red-eyed and furious, standing shirtless in jeans, hair matted. Sharon stood behind him in a gaudy bathrobe, mascara streaked, phone recording. "You can't just barge in," she screamed. "This is abuse." Langston held up the signed writ. "This is law." Michael moved to block the hallway. Langston didn't blink. "Sir, if you obstruct this process, you will be arrested." Sharon shrieked and shoved past them, filming furiously. "Look at this. Look at how they treat us." "Step aside, ma'am," the second deputy said. Janice had the camera rolling from the base of the stairs. "They're throwing out a family," Sharon wailed, "all because of some vindictive old—" "Watch it," Janice muttered. Helen stood at the bottom of the steps, arms folded, calm as ever. Upstairs, the deputies began hauling out boxes, bags, a TV, 2 broken chairs, a coffee table with one leg snapped off and duct tape. Sharon ran outside and started filming from the yard, walking backward in her slippers, eyes wild. "This is elder abuse. She's mentally unstable, and they're letting her do this to her own blood." Helen didn't move. She just held the file in her hands. Writ of possession, certified mail logs, fraud complaint confirmation, surveillance footage timestamps, proof stacked on proof, neat and devastating. Lacey stood behind her grandmother now, silent, head lowered. Sharon's camera caught her in the frame. "And you're siding with her over your own mother?" Lacey didn't respond. She took a slow step behind Helen and disappeared from view. Helen extended a hand, not looking back. Lacey took it without hesitation. The deputies continued emptying the unit. The curb filled with plastic tubs, garbage bags of clothes, an overturned jewelry box, a dented filing cabinet. Michael came out last, red with rage. "We'll sue you for this." "You already tried," Helen said without emotion. "You failed, like everything else." One of the neighbors across the street stood with a cup of coffee, watching in quiet awe. Another had their phone out, recording. Sharon screamed again, turning in circles. "This is a show. You want your audience? Fine, watch us burn." She turned to Janice, who hadn't stopped filming. "You're disgusting." Janice smirked. "And you're evicted." She looked at Helen, then back at the pile of junk now baking on the sidewalk under the morning sun. "That's how you feed dogs who bite," she muttered. Langston handed Helen the signed clearance form. "Lock changed, premises secured. You're clear." Helen finally let out the smallest breath. Behind her, Lacey squeezed her hand. Sharon's voice kept rising, her phone shaking, ranting about lawyers, about news channels, about revenge. But the door was closed. The lock clicked into place with a finality that echoed. Helen walked back inside, calm. But upstairs, the silence wasn't peace. Because downstairs, a trial was coming, and the truth had just kicked the door in. The quiet was the first thing Helen noticed. Not the kind that comes before something awful, but the kind that feels earned like scars, like peace after fire. She sat at her kitchen table, sunlight washing over the worn wood, a mug of hot coffee warming both palms. No screaming, no stomping overhead, no late-night pacing or slamming doors, just stillness, just hers. She looked across the table at the empty seat where Janice had always sat during the hard week. A peach cobbler sat cooling on the stove again, fresh out of the oven. Janice had baked it early that morning and left it with a note on a napkin. "No more cameras, just crumbs now. Love you." Helen smiled faintly, set the note aside. Upstairs, the floor creaked, not with rage, but with rhythm. Lacey's footsteps, pacing back and forth in her new space. Books thudded softly as she unpacked another box. Then came the sound of typing, steady, focused. College classes had started again, and Helen had surprised her last week with a small upstairs desk she found at a second-hand shop. Oak, sturdy, just like her. Outside, the front yard was trimmed, the walkway swept clean. A few neighbors passed on the sidewalk. Some waved now, some even stopped. Mrs. Everett from next door had brought a casserole and said quietly, "I didn't know the half of it. I'm sorry I believed her." The postman had nodded respectfully on Friday and said, "Good for you, Ms. Carter." Not many people fight back like that. Word had gotten around, as had the footage, as had the truth. Elsewhere in Toledo, Sharon and Michael were couch surfing. Rumors said they'd landed at a friend's cramped rental off Airport Highway. Michael was seen muttering into a phone behind the local gas station while Sharon paced near the bus stop, phone in hand, still filming half the time like she might edit the footage into sympathy someday. But sympathy had dried up. Their online following had gone quiet. The GoFundMe Sharon launched only raised $84, most of it from two pitying strangers and one accidental donation from a high school classmate who publicly requested a refund the next day. They were radioactive now, burned from the inside out by their own fire. Robert visited Sunday afternoon. He parked by the curb, straightened his tie in the side mirror, and walked up the front steps carrying a brown folder labeled State of Ohio v. Sharon Carter. Helen opened the door before he knocked. "Thought you'd like this," he said. "It's happening." He handed her the folder. Inside were 2 pages, the finalized court calendar and confirmation that Sharon's case had been bumped to the fraud sentencing track. Formal charges filed, a full trial still pending. Helen read silently, then nodded. "What about Michael?" Robert shrugged. "They're still sorting that out. Depends how much Sharon blames him. She's already distancing." Helen didn't seem surprised. "Snakes don't share the same rock for long." Robert leaned on the doorframe. "When sentencing begins, you'll be called to give a victim impact statement. Want me to help draft it?" "I already started," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "Of course you did." She smiled. Then it faded, slow and solemn. "I'll attend every hearing." Robert didn't question it. "I figured." That evening, Helen sat at the window with her journal in her lap, looking out over the block. The sun dipped behind the elms, casting long golden streaks across the street. Upstairs, Lacey laughed at something, sharp, sudden, a real laugh. Helen closed her eyes and let it settle in her chest like a small fire in winter. Then, she opened her journal to a new page. September 10th, 7:36 p.m. "They emptied my house, but I filled it again. With truth, with peace, with purpose. I kept the proof. Now I'll speak the cost." A soft knock came at the door. Janice stepped in, holding 2 paper cups from the diner. "One more battle to go," she said. Helen took the cup, sipped slowly. "And I intend to finish it," she replied. Every seat in courtroom 3A was filled, not just by lawyers and clerks, but by townspeople. Curious onlookers, former neighbors. 2 local reporters scribbled into pads as Judge Peterson entered with her usual slow, deliberate gait. The air buzzed, not with noise, but tension. The room itself knew justice was about to move. Sharon sat at the defense table, lips painted too red, blazer a size too small, posture a size too proud. She whispered furiously to her court-appointed attorney, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Michael wasn't seated beside her. He wasn't even in the building. Helen sat across the aisle in her pressed navy blouse, spine straight, expression unreadable. Robert Hale shuffled papers beside her, calm and surgical as always. Lacey sat 1 row behind, holding her phone in her lap, earbuds coiled but unused. The bailiff called the case. State of Ohio versus Sharon Carter. Fraud and forgery. Count 1. Judge Peterson's gavel hit. "We begin." Robert rose and walked to the center of the courtroom with the confidence of someone who'd already rehearsed this moment down to the breath. He began with the basics: the forged quitclaim deed, the notarization that never happened, the intent to transfer full ownership of the property without consent. Then he brought out the receipts. "Exhibit A," he said, holding up a side-by-side display of Helen's authentic signature and the one submitted to the county. According to the county forensic handwriting expert, this isn't just similar, it's calculated mimicry. He clicked a remote. On the screen, the court saw loops, curves, and overlays highlighted in yellow. Someone studied Ms. Carter's penmanship, but they didn't know what her C always does at the baseline. They didn't know she crosses her T last, not as she writes. That's not habit. That's history. Sharon shifted. Her jaw clenched. Her lawyer stood weakly. "My client denies these allegations. She believed the paperwork was genuine. She had no reason to question its validity." Robert didn't blink. "Then let's ask the jury why she filed the document 2 days after receiving an eviction notice." There was a slight murmur. Sharon leaned toward her attorney, whispering something. Her smile, brief and strained, flickered across her face like a dying bulb. Robert continued. Now, Exhibit B. Online posts. He handed printouts to the jury. Screenshots from Sharon's Facebook, mocking Helen's mental state, boasting about handling family business the smart way, and one particularly damning post that read, "One little scribble and we'll never have to pay rent again." Then came the moment Helen had prepared for all week. The bailiff called her to the stand. She walked slowly, but with purpose. Sworn in, seated. She looked neither triumphant nor bitter, only resolute. "Ms. Carter," Robert began, "did you sign the deed, transferring ownership to your son and daughter-in-law?" "No," she said clearly. "Were you aware any such filing had occurred before the notice from the county?" "No." "Did you authorize them in any way to act on your behalf for this matter?" "I wouldn't trust either of them with a grocery list." Soft laughter fluttered in the gallery. Robert nodded. "Did you retain all original property documents prior to the forgery?" "I have every page, every receipt, every post-it note that touched that deed. And backup." He paused. "Why did you keep all of it?" Helen looked at the jury. "Because I've learned that when people treat you like furniture, you'd better hold the bill of sale." Silent. Then the final blow came from the quietest corner of the room. "Your Honor," Robert said, "the prosecution calls one final witness, Lacey Carter." Sharon froze. Lacey rose, walked to the stand, and sat with her shoulders back, voice steady. "Did you witness your parents discussing the forged deed?" Robert asked. "Number but, I saw the lead-up. And I have something more important." She pulled her phone from her jacket pocket, unlocked it, and pressed play. From the speakers came Sharon's unmistakable voice, recorded weeks earlier. "Let's serve her the dog food. If she's going to treat us like dogs, she should eat like one. Watch her chew it. Film it." The courtroom was dead silent. Robert turned off the recording. Sharon's smirk evaporated. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Judge Peterson leaned forward. "Jury will recess for deliberation." It took less than 40 minutes. The verdict came back swift and unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Peterson scheduled sentencing for the following week. Sharon sat frozen in her chair, lips trembling, mascara streaking as reality sank in. Helen didn't look at her. She looked at the jury, then at Lacey, then down at her folder. One page left to turn. The upstairs unit smelled like paint and lemon oil again. Fresh baseboards gleamed beneath sunlit windows. The warped tile in the kitchen had been replaced with laminate that clicked gently under Helen's careful steps. Where Lacey's childhood posters once curled on the walls, now hung quiet watercolor prints, floral, muted, adult. It was a clean house now. Helen stood in the threshold of the vacant unit, clipboard in one hand, keys in the other. A young couple, Sam and Elise Nguyen, walked behind her, eyes wide with the reverence that only comes from scraping together enough savings to call something your own. "I left the upstairs fridge stocked," Helen said plainly, "but you don't owe me for that. It's just hospitality." Elise blinked, touched. "That's incredibly kind." Sam nodded. "We've had landlords who barely said hello. This feels like—" He trailed off, looking around. Helen offered a thin smile. "Like someone cared before you moved in?" He grinned sheepishly. "Exactly." Downstairs, Lacey's laughter drifted through the vent, a low chuckle, muffled by headphones. The semester had just begun, and already her art portfolio was pinned across the living room like a gallery. Helen had added a small desk in the corner for her. She paid the first tuition bill without blinking. 1 month of rent from the new tenants had covered it. That evening, Janice sat on the porch swing with Helen, sipping lemonade that was a little too tart but still perfect. A breeze carried the scent of sawdust and lavender from the flower beds. "Well," Janice said, stretching her back with a groan, "from dog food to dividends. Not bad, Carter." Helen let out a sound that surprised them both. A laugh, not a smirk, not that dry, brittle thing she'd weaponized for survival. A real, full-bodied laugh, low and warm and so long absent it felt like sunlight through a window she forgot she'd closed. Janice blinked. "Was that a laugh?" Helen sipped her lemonade again, eyes sparkling. "Don't make a thing of it. You earned it." They sat in easy silence. Across town, the sentence had dropped that morning. Sharon, 6 months in county jail, with a formal fraud conviction that would follow her like a shadow for the rest of her days. Judge Peterson had made it crystal clear. Community service wouldn't suffice. Not after the false guardianship stunt. Not after the Facebook posts. Not after the dog food. Michael, meanwhile, had wriggled free of jail time, barely. With no direct signature on the forged document, he avoided criminal charges, but the civil suits from the notary's office and Helen's insurance carrier had drained him dry. By the end of the week, his truck was repossessed and his bank account frozen. No one in town returned his calls, not even his old union buddies. Helen didn't rejoice in it. She simply recorded the facts. That night, Lacey came down to the kitchen barefoot, eyes soft with fatigue and contentment. "I got an A on my sketch of the duplex," she said, holding up the page. It was charcoal, soft, textured, capturing the porch steps with loving imperfection. A bird perched on the mailbox. Helen ran her fingers over the page. "You see it differently now." Lacey nodded. "It's ours now." They pinned the sketch to the fridge. The next day, the local paper ran a small column. "Justice served quietly. Elder fraud case ends in conviction." Helen's name wasn't in the headline, but it was in the lead paragraph. So was the word resilient. Helen folded the paper neatly and placed it beneath her journal. She didn't underline anything this time. No entry, no signature, just a long exhale. The house was clean. But upstairs, in Lacey's room, a new page was waiting, and this time, no one else would write on it but her. The roast filled the house with a warmth no heater could match. The scent of thyme and slow garlic danced with the crackle of bread cooling on a rack. In the center of the table, a single white candle flickered tall and steady. No holiday decoration, no place cards, no fuss, just food. Real food, for real people. Helen adjusted the folded linen napkins at each setting. She didn't rush. She didn't double-check. Everything was as it should be. At 6:30 on the dot, Janice arrived first, carrying a pie she claimed she hadn't baked, but which no one believed for a second. "Don't you dare cut this before I Instagram it," she warned, dropping her coat on the chair. At 6:34, Robert Hale knocked, as punctual and pressed as ever. No tie tonight, just a gray sweater and the faint look of a man who hadn't been invited to a meal without an agenda in months. At 6:40, Lacey emerged from upstairs, her hair in a braid, wearing a soft navy sweater that matched Helen's blouse perfectly, though neither mentioned it. They sat together at the round oak table like they'd been doing it forever. The roast chicken was carved slowly. The bread, still warm, passed in silence. Steam fogged up the windows, making the world outside disappear. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Robert raised his glass, ginger ale fizzing like champagne, and nodded to Helen. "Not bad for a woman who's allegedly incompetent," he said dryly. Janice snorted. Lacey grinned. Helen smiled. "I do what I can." They ate. There was no dog food, no shame, no performance, just mashed potatoes with cracked pepper, carrots roasted to near candy, and a meal served without a trace of mockery. Halfway through, Janice leaned back, wiped her mouth, and said, "You know, I've been waiting for this. A real dinner. Not survival, not strategy, just something earned." Helen nodded. "It was never about revenge. Not really." Robert raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" Helen tilted her head. "It was about memory, about who I was before they tried to bury me in my own home." She glanced at the candle's flame. It held firm. No sputter. No flicker. "They served me dog food," she said. "I served them eviction." Janice raised her fork. "Now that's a recipe I'd write down." Lacey poured more tea into everyone's cups, the kettle hissing gently behind her. When they'd finished the meal and the dishes had been stacked neatly in the sink, not rushed, not dumped, Lacey stood with her glass in hand. She cleared her throat, a little flushed. "I want to say something." Everyone turned to her. She glanced at Helen, then at the empty plate where the chicken bones sat stripped clean. "To eating your words," she said. "Not other people's." Helen let out a slow breath, almost a laugh. "Cheers to that." They clinked glasses. Outside, the cicadas had grown quieter, August giving its last sigh before fall arrived. The breeze curled around the porch railing. Inside, the candle had burned down an inch, but the flame never wavered. Later, when the kitchen was quiet again and Janice had gone home humming and Robert had tipped his glass one last time in farewell, Helen walked to the window and looked out at the elm tree. Leaves swayed in the dark, indifferent and ancient. Lacey passed behind her, wrapped in a blanket, heading upstairs. "I'll lock up," she said softly. Helen didn't answer, just stood still. This was her house, her rules, her peace. She turned to the table. The candle burned low but not out, and blew gently. The flame disappeared with a whisper. She placed her journal on the table one last time, opened to the final page, and wrote, "They mocked my plate. I cleared theirs, forever."